The ANC has proposed changes to its housing policy to give preference to the elderly, disabled and proven military veterans by doing away with the free housing project and taking on a site and service approach of encouraging citizens to actually build their own homes. It certainly sounds interesting. Online is Querida Saal, researcher at the Development Action Group. Querida, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much.
What do you make of this? I know that for a number of years, a lot of people have been saying that part of the solution to our housing crisis is to give people the land, to give them a site with running water and electricity plug-in point and let people build their own homes. Okay, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing that we're hearing from the ANC?
I think first we must acknowledge that it's a monumental shift. It is huge for people who are on the waiting list and who for years have been expecting that government is going to build them an actual house as opposed to land, giving them land or service land with services. But I think from our perspective, one also has to accept that the policy shift in some ways was inevitable. I mean, in November 2021, when the former minister, Sisulu, made pronouncements with regards to this, the reasons that were put forward for this possible policy shift is that there's simply not enough finances or money to continue building houses for the over 12 million people now, I think is the backlog, that require housing and support from the government in this regard. A second reason was that landless people were asking the government for land, give us services and let us build our own houses. So in some ways, the policy shift was eventually going to happen, but at the same time, the key challenge for us has been that even though there's been discussion around this since 2020, 2021, we've never really seen a very clear policy or a strategy that details the how of this policy shift.
Right.
And I think that's the important part.
Yeah, in fact, I think, in the newsroom earlier today, people were also saying how, but I do think that you've got unanimous agreement when you said it's a game changer, and that it's a monumental change. Those were the words you used. But obviously, the execution is, I suppose, the devil of the details, because in South Africa, we're good at policy, but not good at execution.
And that's exactly the issue. I mean, there are so many questions that still remain with regards to how this is going to happen. For instance, right, you need questions answered around just the land that's going to be made available. If we look at where BNG or RDP housing is currently provided, it's on the outskirts of the city. It's far away from social amenities, far away from jobs, and that's because that's where affordable land, according to government, is found or is more available to them. So with rapid land release or site and services, we similarly have to ask this key question. This land that you're going to be making available, how is this going to happen? And I think it's also to note that we refer to it as site as services, but it's also known as a rapid land release. And that's because there's the idea that it would happen quicker, or people will be able to access a home quicker than before. But now the challenge is that without the necessary support, and I can discuss those support mechanisms that need to be in place for a site and services program to work effectively, we might find a situation where people end up getting the land and services from the government, but because they don't have the finance mechanisms, because the construction sector is not set up quite yet in a way to support them, and for a range of other reasons, they're not quite yet able to build their house as quickly as one would expect. So what are we looking at? These are the concerns with regards to site and services. We can have this policy change, but we need to be very clear about how this is going to play out so that it actually reaches its objective, which is that more people get access to a house much quicker.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, Querida, because I personally don't see brick and mortar houses going up because they're just too expensive. So I foresee some pretty creative options coming out in terms of how these houses are built. Do you think, before we go to what support services are needed, that government is going to have to be sympathetic to alternative building methods like sandbag houses, alternative materials, that is going to have to be the way to go forward?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's been quite a bit of research done with regards to this. But the challenge in this regard is that we're going to be relying quite a bit on the private sector to assist people to build the houses. So issues around quality control, what building materials are appropriate within the spaces that we work, how communities understand these processes and these new building technologies, how they're able to access these materials and resources. So it's definitely an option, and I think we need to be considering innovative ways to deliver housing in a much more efficient way. But at the same time, there's also other concerns that we need to bear in mind when we put these different options on the table.
Yeah, you mentioned that there have to be support services. I think that is the no-brainer part of the equation. But just specify for our listeners what you would regard as essential support services for a site and service approach. It's very nice having sort of a tap and maybe a plug-in where you can get electricity, but it's not as simple as that, is it?
Absolutely not. So for one, we have to think about the finance mechanism. Firstly, how is the land going to be financed? The government has made some pronouncements. It's not exactly clear because we haven't quite seen a policy document. But if you're going to be having a whole lot more people relying on state support to build their own houses, the requisite financing mechanisms need to be in place. Where will people go? How will they access the financing? And this is post the site and services being given to them. So we need to think about financing for building the actual top structure or the house. Whether that's through the banking sector. In fact, how will the banking sector, if that, be able to accommodate people to now, and this is low-income people, remember, who normally would not qualify for loans from the bank to build their own homes. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's in terms of financing mechanisms, but I think it's also the fact that the construction sector needs to be set up in such a way that it's able to support low-income families, large groups of people, to build their own houses. Now, in the past, we had the EPHP. It still functions to some degree, but just in the city of Cape Town, for instance, the targets are so low per year. I think for the next 5 years, it's over 3,000. And the EPHP does not function effectively right now to be able to give the kind of support that is needed to a whole large group of people.
Yeah. Now, I was just going to say, what is interesting in this equation is, do you think, I know I'm butting in a bit, that government would have to listen to a lot of people on the ground, including a number of NGOs who over the years have developed some very creative and cost-effective ways of housing people at an extremely low cost. I mean, I know of one or two NGOs, I could point them out to you, who've done sort of pilot projects which have come in way under government budgets, and yet they have been ignored to this very day.
Absolutely, but maybe just to take you back even a little bit further, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, if this is going to be the new way going forward, is the government ready to function in a way that is much more consultative, participatory, that includes the voices of everybody, and where they actually listen to everybody? And is the internal mechanisms within municipalities set up in such a way that it's going to allow for a housing system or structure that where people can come to a municipality and say to them, these are the challenges that I face, how can you assist me? And we're not quite there yet. In fact, we're far from that right now. And of course, we cannot underestimate or understate the role that NGOs can play in this regard, many years ago when the EPHP was in the process, DAG, in fact, was was leading the discussions around developing the EPHP and played a pivotal role in setting up an institutional structure that could respond to the needs of the people building these homes, but also be a medium between the people and government in terms of what are the challenges, how do we deal with them, what are the risks, how do we mitigate them. So NGOs can play an important role, but at the same time, and I'm sure will have to play a key role in facilitating these processes. But we also must not undervalue the voices of people themselves to be able to, which is I think one of the key outcomes of this policy shift, build their own homes and be in charge of their own development.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, do you feel, I mean, you used the word monumental right at the beginning, that this is a step in the right direction? Obviously, we still have to see the details, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of contestation and debate in that space. But I mean, my gut feel is at least a decision has been made. That to me does indicate a certain measure of progress and also a certain measure of real politic that we have to change the model of trying to house people. The old traditional model has failed us.
Look, in principle, we support the policy shift. And that's because we have to look at the realities of the current financial system, what the government has within its pockets to be able to deliver on what is an absolutely huge need. So in that respect, we definitely support the underlying principle. It does, in some way, as you say, show some movement towards wanting to actually really address South Africa's housing crisis. At the same time, though, I think we have to bear in mind that without the government figuring out the details, not just by themselves, but with civil society, with communities, and us working this new shift out together, we might actually end up not being successful, despite this huge impact that this policy shift can have on many people.
Yeah, so it certainly is, I'm sure you'll agree, an interesting juncture, an interesting point. And a lot of us, in fact, most of us, are going to be sitting, waiting expectantly to see what the details are going to be before we can proceed further.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been pronouncements like, first of all, what's been said in the public domain up until now, and we've been lamenting this as that, is not much with regards to the policy shift. I think this, the fact that the ANC has now noted in its discussion documents leading up to their conference in July that they are going to be ushering in this new policy shift via an actual policy is probably the first real, at national level at the very least, strategy or policy document that we have that we can actually engage with in terms of finding out the how and the details and so forth. We've seen some directives given by national to province, and we've seen municipalities speaking on it to some degree, but I think this is really an important juncture, as you say, for us, and we are watching or waiting with bated breath to see what this policy shift says with regards to the policy document says with regards to the shift.
Querida Saal, researcher at the Development Action Group, known as DAG for short, chatting to us about the ANC proposing major monumental changes to its housing policy to indulge in a site and service of approach of encouraging citizens to actually build their own houses on land provided. Querida Saal, thanks for chatting to us, and we look forward to seeing where this is going to take us.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Drive Time on 91.3. Always on the cutting edge.